At North Bend Animal Emergency, the hallway was too quiet for the number of uniforms packed inside it. Officers from Willow Creek Police Department stood shoulder to shoulder, their badges reflecting the sterile white lights, their hands unusually still. No one was issuing commands. No one was making jokes, because behind the closed exam room door, their canine partner was dying. Riley wasn't just any police dog. 6 years on patrol had turned him into a legend: drug busts, missing persons rescues, and the kind of loyalty that made even the toughest officers lower their voices when they said his name. But legends didn't matter now. Now he was just a German shepherd on an oxygen mask, lying on a metal table, his chest rising slower than it should have been. Dr. Jonathan Hayes, the attending veterinarian, had done everything he could. Fluids, medication, emergency stabilization. Nothing was working anymore. The monitor told a story no one wanted to read. "His organs are shutting down," one of the techs whispered. An officer swallowed hard. "There's nothing else." Dr. Hayes didn't answer immediately. That silence said more than words ever could. Because sometimes, medicine stopped being about saving and started being about ending suffering. Sophia Bennett stood in the corner of the hallway, small and still, holding something in her pocket like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She wasn't here as a stranger. She was here as the reason Riley had survived this long. 3 years ago, she had been 9 years old and lost in the woods outside Willow Creek. Was Riley who found her first? Not the officers, not the search teams. The dog had broken through the trees, bleeding from a thorn injury, and sat beside her until help arrived. After that day, Riley never left her world completely. He visited her school. He slept outside her hospital room once when she broke her arm. He even stole her blue ribbon during one of the visits and refused to give it back until she left. Now that same girl stood outside a room where adults were preparing to say goodbye. Inside, Dr. Hayes reached for a syringe. The euthanasia dose was ready. "Is everyone prepared?" he asked quietly. No one answered, because no one ever really was. Part 2, the final hug. Riley's handler, Officer David Thorne, sat in the corner of the exam room, his face buried in his hands. He was a broken man. But the grief wasn't just because he was losing his best friend. It was because David was facing prison. Earlier that week, a massive bust of cartel drug money had gone missing from the precinct's evidence locker. Internal Affairs had found a duffel bag of the cash in the trunk of David's squad car. He had been suspended, stripped of his badge, and accused of stealing the money and poisoning his own dog to keep Riley from tracking the rest of the stash. David had begged them to let him see Riley one last time, had sneered but allowed it, standing guard by the door with a smug expression. "Time's up, Thorne," Lieutenant Harris said coldly. "Let the vet do his job." Dr. Hayes uncapped the needle. "It will give you a moment." Just then, the heavy wooden door creaked open. The sea of blue uniforms in the hallway parted, and 12-year-old Sophia walked in. Her eyes were red, but her face was set with a strange, fierce determination. She walked straight past the commanding officers, past Lieutenant Harris, and right up to the metal table. "Sophia, honey, you shouldn't be in here for this," David whispered, his voice cracking. "I came to give him his ribbon back," she said softly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the faded blue ribbon Riley had stolen from her years ago. She leaned over the table, pressing her forehead against the dying dog's snout. "You're a good boy, Riley," she whispered into his ear. "But you can't go yet. You have to tell them what you saw." And then, she wrapped her small arms around his neck. Part 3, the witness. For a second, nothing happened. The heart monitor continued its slow, agonizing beep. Dr. Hayes stepped forward with the syringe. But as Sophia pulled back, Riley's body twitched. His eyes, which had been clouded and half-closed, suddenly snapped open. He didn't look at Sophia. He didn't look at David. Riley's gaze locked violently onto the doorway, specifically onto Lieutenant Harris. A low, rattling sound vibrated in the dog's throat. It was weak at first, but it grew into a deep, guttural growl that made the hair on the back of everyone's neck stand up. Despite his failing organs, despite the oxygen mask, Riley bared his teeth. He tried to drag himself forward off the table, his eyes burning with a sudden, pure hatred directed entirely at Harris. "Whoa, easy, buddy," Dr. Hayes said, startled, stepping back. "He smells the bad man," Sophia said, her voice piercing the stunned silence of the room. Lieutenant Harris took a nervous step backward, his hand instinctively dropping to his duty belt. The dog's rabid. "Put him down, now." But Riley wasn't done. With a violent jerk of his head, he knocked the oxygen mask away. He pawed frantically at the blue ribbon Sophia had placed next to him, then nudged something that had been hidden beneath his own heavy leather collar, something he had been guarding since the night he collapsed. It was a torn piece of fabric, black, tactical nylon. David shot up from his chair. He recognized that fabric. It was a piece of an internal affairs tactical vest. "What is that?" Dr. Hayes asked, reaching for the scrap. As the vet touched the fabric, he noticed a faint, bluish powder coating. The edges of the tear, Dr. Hayes brought it to his nose and his eyes widened in horror. "This is aconite," Dr. Hayes gasped. "Wolfsbane. It's a rare, highly toxic plant extract. It mimics organ failure in canines. It's almost impossible to detect unless you know exactly what you're looking for." Part 4. The Truth Unleashed. The pieces clicked together in David's mind with lightning speed. Riley hadn't just gotten sick. He had been attacked. He had bitten his attacker, tearing a piece of their vest, and had been poisoned in the process to keep him quiet. And the only person in the precinct who wore that specific black tactical nylon was Lieutenant Harris. "Harris," David said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You planted the money in my car, and when Riley caught you in the evidence room, you poisoned him." "That's insane," Harris barked, his face pale. "You're taking the word of a dying dog and a kid." But the other officers in the room were already moving. 2 patrolmen stepped into the doorway, blocking Harris's exit. "Check his vest," one of the sergeants ordered. Harris panicked. He tried to shove his way past the officers, but they tackled him to the linoleum floor. As they restrained him, the sergeant pulled back Harris's jacket. Right at the waistline of his tactical vest was a jagged, fresh tear, perfect match for the scrap of fabric on the exam table. The entire police department realized in that exact moment, Riley wasn't just a dying dog. He was the prime witness to a massive police corruption scandal, and he had held onto the evidence until the very last second, waiting to save his handler's life. Part 5. The Antidote. "Doc," David shouted over the chaos of Harris being dragged out in handcuffs. "If it's aconites, they're a cure. Can you save him?" Dr. Hayes didn't answer. He had already thrown the euthanasia syringe into the biohazard bin and was sprinting toward the pharmacy cabinets. "Aconite poisoning is treatable, if caught. But we need to counteract the cardiotoxicity immediately," Hayes yelled over his shoulder. He returned seconds later with a different syringe, this one filled with atropine and a specific antiarrhythmic cocktail. "Hold him steady." David rushed to the table, placing his hands gently on Riley's trembling sides. Sophia stood right beside him, holding Riley's paw. Dr. Hayes injected the antidote directly into Riley's IV line. For 10 agonizing minutes, the room was dead silent, save for the beeping of the monitor. The heart rate spiked, plummeted, slowly, miraculously, began to find a steady rhythm. The erratic, shallow breathing deepened. Riley let out a long, exhausted sigh, and his head rested heavily against Sophia's hand. Dr. Hayes checked the monitors, a massive smile breaking across his stressed face. "His heart rate is stabilizing. The toxins are flushing. He's going to make it." David collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor, weeping openly. Sophia knelt beside him and handed him the blue ribbon. Epilogue: A legend returns. 3 months later, The sun was shining brightly over the Willow Creek Police Precinct. Lieutenant Harris was awaiting trial in a federal penitentiary, facing decades behind bars for grand theft, corruption, and animal cruelty. Officer David Thorne had his badge, his reputation, and his life fully restored. But the biggest celebration wasn't for David. Standing on the steps of the precinct, wearing a brand new custom-fitted canine harness, was Riley. His coat was shiny, his eyes were bright, and he looked stronger than ever. As the mayor pinned a Medal of Valor onto Riley's collar, the crowd of officers, citizens, and reporters erupted into cheers. But Riley didn't care about the medal or the applause. His eyes were locked on a 12-year-old girl standing in the front row. With a quick bark, Riley broke protocol. He trotted down the steps, walked right up to Sophia Bennett, and gently nudged her hand. When she reached out to pet him, he stealthily grabbed the blue ribbon from her pocket with his teeth and trotted back to David, tail wagging furiously. The legend hadn't just survived. He had proved, once and for all, that some heroes don't need words to tell the truth. They just need someone who is willing to listen.